Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. Now when it came to choosing a chapter to paint the new Leviathan Terminators, for me there was really only one choice. Had to be Dark Angels. At one point the Dark Angels were my biggest army, going back a few years, and I had the entire Deathwing in the old school metal Terminators with all the Dark Angels accessories on it. So I thought, right, this is an opportunity to go back in the past to those, kind of reinvigorate an old paint scheme that I used to use with a bit of a modern twist, especially as these models are significantly larger and more impressive than those, but didn't have any Dark Angel iconography. So the first stage really was to decide how I was going to do the basing scheme, how I was going to convert them, and then move on to the paint scheme. So I'll show you this. Now, a new project for me is sometimes a new chance to experiment with some new products, new ways of basing or whatever. So I picked up some Vallejo Diorama FX, and this is the thick mud stuff, and this is really like a paste that's been soaked in like a resiny type stuff, I think. I'm not entirely sure how it's made. And the idea is you flick it onto your finished vehicles or models to make it look muddied up. Now I'm not using it in quite that way. Now because I'm not using it the way they recommend, I thought I'd do a tester. Picked up an old base, smeared a couple of mil layer across this old base to see how this would work as a basing paste. Let it dry, really liked the effect, and thought, right, I'll roll that out onto the models. Now I wanted to do something a little bit different on the base. A classic favourite thing of mine is the skull sprues that Games Workshop sells. Literally went through there, picked out a number of human skulls or Tyranid skulls that are on there, and put that in onto the base with a little bit of poly cement before using the paste. Let that thoroughly dry, and now we're on to customising it. And I'm not going to show you how I made these symbols, but I used some blue stuff to cast up some Dark Angel symbols from some old Terminator shoulder pads, and then cut those symbols out and glued them onto the Marines. Now I've got a full video on how to use blue stuff to make symbols. Now the reason I had to do that is obviously the old Terminator shoulder pads with those Dark Angel symbols are just too small. So if you want to check out how to make these symbols yourself, video down below. So I put those cast up symbols onto the shoulders of every Marine, and then you saw there on the power fist of one. And then I also used the Dark Angel accessory sprue to put on some little bits of Dark Angel symbology across the models. Now, I'm not really going to the basing other than to say I am basing these in the same way that I'm basing the Leviathan Tyranids, so that it kind of works together. Now it's onto the actual painting. Sprayed the models back and sprayed them with a lead belcher spray. I love painting on top of metallics for 40k stuff. I find it really, really useful before moving on to the main colours. Now starting off with a Vallejo Bone White, and any colours I use will be the top left of the screen. I'll do like a summary page at the end if you want to follow the exact ones. But when I'm putting this Bone White colour down, I'm not being super precious about like really thoroughly covering everything. You'll see I'm doing 2 to 3 very thin layers. Not worried if in some of the gaps and cracks I'm letting some of the metallics show through, because that'll represent battle damage as I'm going, and we don't need to make the layering absolutely perfect and completely opaque, because we're going to do some wash layers and stuff later. So if you leave a bit through and there's a bit of the undercoat showing through and it's a bit patchy, don't worry about it, we'll fix that later. Now moving on to the symbology. Classic Dark Angel colour to use on the symbols is that red, so I'm just taking that and putting it onto all the cast up symbols we put on the shoulder pads. As you can see, they've worked and blended in really effectively, I think, these symbols that we've cast up here. You wouldn't necessarily know that this wasn't part of the original model. Now I'm also doing the gun casings and the purity seals in that red, and I'm also going to drop that red into the eye sockets of the Terminator helmets. Very classic colour for gun casing and those kind of things. Now the chest eagle going in for a dark green, and this reflects the actual normal kind of green wing, as they now call them, Dark Angels armour colour, and it pulls that into the Terminators themselves. You could also, if you wanted to, do these maybe in a gold colour, but I think the classic thing to do is to reflect that Dark Angel green on there. Now the Crux Terminators symbols on the left shoulders and also in the Sergeant's kind of knee area, these were in the background traditionally made of stone. So we're going in for a dark grey colour onto there, and with this you want to make sure you don't let any of that base coat show through. On the armour it doesn't matter because it looks like battle damage, but these are areas of stone, so just be clear. Now some detailing with some Retributor armour, and really just picking out you can see there you call it the belt buckle area, and the Crux Terminator symbols and things they've got around them there, just to add a little bit of kind of venerable detail with that gold there. Going on to the winged skull, onto the Stormbolter, and also into your magazine, because it's that exposed magazine showing those bolter shells in there. There's also a number of skulls and things around the model you're going to want to pick up and pick out with that. Now just some final details, picking a bit of blue there into some of the sensors and things on the pack there. I also used the blue on a couple of the feathers that I'd put on these models from that Dark Angel accessory sprue. Again, on the Dark Angel accessory sprue, you get these little books with the winged symbols on there. So just dropping a brown onto there to make it look like, an actual kind of leather bound book that he's carrying around with him onto his Terminator armour. Now that's all the base coats completed. So you see there, most of the base coats have been really thorough, made sure nothing's showing through apart from that bone white colour we started off with, because that doesn't matter for the battle damage. Now it's the wash stage. Make sure your previous colours are thoroughly dry before you do this, because you don't want anything running and smearing. And we're taking the Games Workshop Seraphim Sepia. This is a fairly clean sepia wash. If you watch my channel a lot, you'll know I use some of the Vallejo stuff. It's quite a dirty wash. I didn't want to do that with the Space Marine, so it's not quite my normal technique. But this sepia wash will take all the tones down, kind of blend them together a little bit, and give us some sort of deep shading colours. So we've covered the whole model in a good layer, let it thoroughly dry, and you see what it looks like after the effect. Now it has really kind of muckied up that armour, but not too bad. We're more concerned now about keeping it in the recesses. We're now going to bring up the armour colour. So we're just going straight back to that bleach bone colour. Now because I paint on a wet palette, it is fairly diluted. So if you don't paint on a wet palette, you will want to be about 50-50 to your water and paint mix. And we're really putting a very, very thin layer of paint on here, letting it build up gradually. We want to be staying away from the recesses because we want that sepia wash in there. And then as you go into the center of your armor panel, that's where you want to pull the paint towards, so that it kind of gives a gradiated effect, and it looks kind of multi-tonal. If you've got areas like here, so slowing the paint schema down again, where the wash has pooled at the bottom of an armor panel, don't worry about covering that pool. You can see here I'm doing a very thin layer again, pulling from top to bottom, but then I'm actually dragging the paint away from the edges up kind of into the center of the panel again. Now it doesn't matter for my style if we have this kind of the wash pooling at the bottom showing kind of through, because what it'll do is it'll make that area of the bone armor slightly darker. Just showing you around the kind of neck panels here, dropping into the detail and leaving, you can see all the recessed areas, leaving that wash kind of showing. And I make a mistake there and I put some of that white into a washed area. Clean my brush off, go back in and just take that paint off before it has a chance to dry. And because it's quite a watery paint I'm putting on there, you can get that off quite easily. And again, because it is fairly watery, you will need to do 2 or 3 passes on most of these armor panel areas, and you'll see then it sort of builds the layers up. Now one area where you might not want to do more than 1 or 2 passes is the kind of face plates. On the larger flat panels you want to use a more watered paint so you can build up gradually. Here we're doing a bit more of an edge highlight, so there's more paint to that water, and you are putting less layers on there because you're wanting a bit more of a stark contrast. On the smaller panel areas that kind of works better. Again, now moving on to the colours, and we are just edge highlighting onto the reds. We're not going necessarily on all the flat areas of the panels like we did with the bone armour, because you can have that contrast quite stark with the red, because the wash you've put on doesn't dull it down as much as it does onto the white armour. Hence I'm saying in the first stage you don't need to worry about getting that armour really crisp with your first layers, because the wash is going to take those tones down and cover some of your mistakes that you've made. So going around now with the red and just again dropping some highlights onto appropriate areas on the wings, on the symbology, onto there and into the eye as well. So all I'm doing is the very back top part of the eye I'm putting the paint in and just pulling it forward. You can see hopefully that the wider part of the eye lens has now had a second layer of red, so that in that kind of narrower eye area it's that bit darker and it looks like we've put a bit of effort into those eyes. Highlighting the crux terminalis and the shoulder there just to put a little bit of detail and shading, and that's what this level is really about. Taking the colours we've already used, going back where that wash has been and just dropping on those highlight layers, and you can see it's quite a stark difference because we've darkened it all down with the wash. It really stands out when you put the highlight back onto the green. And we are really at the kind of final stages of finishing up this model, just dropping these highlights on. You don't have to do anything other than use the original paints that you went through the scheme. I did just a little bit though onto the white, so moving away from that bone white and taking an off-white colour and just highlighting the very, very edges of the armour to just make it pop that little bit more. Now you could do that with the greens, the reds, every other colour we've used, and take a lighter version of the colours we've already used, but I just felt it was necessary to do it with the white just on the edges to give that little bit of extra detail to pop on the armour. And that's the scheme really done. So I'm really pleased with the scheme. I've always loved Dark Angels, particularly like the Deathwing. I love the original background of how the Deathwing formed, and warriors that knew they were going to the death fighting gene stealers, painting over their armour in a ritual that the tribes they'd come from on their home planet used to do. Don't know if that still exists in the background. I suppose I'll have to read that when the codex comes out, but really pleased with how these have come out. For me, a classic of 40k kind of background, a really enjoyable colour scheme. moved away from what I've been doing lately in my Marines, but this is definitely going to be the start of a pure Deathwing army. So I look forward to what Games Workshop release really in the coming months to do with this Deathwing army. So I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of YouTube jazz, and hopefully I will see you on another video.